What if everything you thought you knew about Meghan Markle and her children was a lie? What if the story the world has been told for years, of a loving mother, a devoted duchess, and her two young children, was a carefully crafted illusion hiding secrets that could shake the royal family to its core? In the first moments after hearing this, most people feel disbelief, shock, denial. How could this be possible? How could someone so meticulously scrutinized by the media, so public in her actions, harbor a truth so explosive that even the palace would fear its consequences? That's the question that has gripped insiders, journalists, and royal watchers alike. And now, MI6 has finally stepped in to investigate what many have suspected but dared not say out loud. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It all begins with the children, Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor and Lilibet Diana, two names that have become synonymous with modern royal life, media fascination, and, in recent years, controversy. The public has been captivated by Meghan and Harry's decision to step back from royal duties, by their legal battles with the press, and by the perception that they are a modern fairy tale in reverse, a story of privilege colliding with rebellion. But behind the headlines, behind the public statements and carefully staged photo ops, there are whispers, hints, and now, documents that point to a truth far stranger than anyone could have imagined. MI6, Britain's notoriously secretive intelligence agency, is rarely involved in matters of personal family records. Their mandate is national security, espionage, and threats that affect the crown and the country. So why would they suddenly take an interest in birth records for two children of a high-profile royal couple? The answer lies in anomalies, small inconsistencies that, when pieced together, form a picture that is as alarming as it is shocking. Sources close to the investigation have revealed that these anomalies were not just clerical errors. They were deliberate, and they raise questions that even the most experienced investigators found difficult to ignore. To understand the gravity of the situation, consider this: birth records, hospital documents, and legal certifications are the backbone of identity verification. For most people, they are bureaucratic formalities. For the royal family, they are instruments that protect legitimacy, succession, and historical accuracy. Any discrepancy in these documents could, theoretically, challenge claims to titles, inheritance, and recognition. And that's exactly why the recent leak from MI6 has sent ripples through Buckingham Palace and beyond. According to sources, the investigation began quietly. No press conferences, no announcements, no public leaks. MI6 operatives reviewed hospital records, cross-referenced private registries, and even conducted forensic audits of documents previously assumed to be untouchable. Every detail was scrutinized: dates, signatures, medical records, and legal filings. It was meticulous work, the kind of work that requires patience, precision, and absolute secrecy. And what they found was nothing short of extraordinary. At the heart of the revelations is a claim that has stunned both insiders and the public. Meghan Markle may not be the biological mother of her children. Let that sink in for a moment. This is not speculation or rumor. This is the assertion based on leaked MI6 documents, verified sources, and investigative cross-checks. For decades, the world has seen images of Meghan cradling Archie and Lilibet, moments of tenderness captured in photos that went viral. But even the most convincing public persona cannot change biological reality. This revelation, if true, has layers of implications that extend beyond personal drama. It touches on succession rights, legal recognition, and the integrity of royal lineage. It raises questions about the methods used to maintain public appearances, the secrecy within the palace, and the extraordinary lengths individuals may go to in order to preserve image and power. And it also sparks a very human question: how does one reconcile the love and care a parent gives with the biological truths that define legal and societal recognition? But before we jump to conclusions, it's important to explore the subtle signs that were there all along. For years, sharp-eyed commentators and insiders have noted discrepancies, minor inconsistencies in public statements, timelines that didn't fully align, and behavior that suggested pressure and urgency behind closed doors. Meghan's life has always been intensely scrutinized, from her Hollywood career to her royal engagements. But sometimes the most significant truths hide in plain sight, overlooked because people assume the story they see is the story they are meant to believe. The tension between perception and reality is what makes this story so compelling. Publicly, Meghan and Harry have cultivated an image of family unity, modernity, and independence. Privately, sources claim that panic and fear have begun to dominate Meghan's actions. Leaks suggest frantic calls, closed-door meetings, and strategic moves designed to control information before it could reach the press or, worse, the public. Every step, every word, every public appearance has been calculated. But even the most careful planning cannot fully contain the reach of a determined intelligence agency. And that brings us to the present moment. The leak of MI6's findings is not a story about gossip. It is a story about truth, secrecy, and the lengths to which people will go to protect their narrative. It is about a mother whose life has been under a microscope for years, confronted with evidence that challenges the very foundation of her public identity. It is about a royal family navigating the intersection of tradition, legality, and public scrutiny in an age where nothing can stay hidden for long. As the public, we are left with questions. How will Meghan respond? What does this mean for Archie and Lilibet? How will the palace manage a revelation that has the potential to rewrite the story of modern monarchy? And most importantly, what does it say about the way secrets, power, and family intersect at the highest levels of society? Even more compelling is the human element, the panic, the fear, the emotional turmoil that accompanies such a revelation. Imagine being confronted with undeniable evidence that challenges everything you've publicly claimed. Imagine the weight of legacy, reputation, and public expectation pressing down from all sides. And now, imagine millions of eyes watching every move you make, every reaction, every statement. This is the world Meghan Markle is navigating, and the stakes could not be higher. But the story doesn't end here. The documents, the findings, the cross-verified records, they all point toward an even deeper truth that will soon be revealed. And the most shocking part? It wasn't just the public narrative at risk. According to sources, there are forces within the palace and government who have been aware of this for years, quietly maneuvering behind the scenes to protect certain interests while keeping others in the dark. The tension, the secrecy, the carefully guarded information, it all culminates in a revelation that could change public perception forever. In just a few moments, we will dive deeper into the investigation, the anomalies in the birth records, and the reactions that have been quietly unfolding behind palace walls. We will explore the evidence, the human drama, and the unexpected twists that make this story far more than a headline. Every chapter ahead will peel back layers of secrecy, confront contradictions, and reveal moments of raw emotion, fear, and strategic maneuvering. So ask yourself, how much of what you've seen, read, and believed about Meghan Markle is really true? And what happens when the secrets she's kept and the truths the world has yet to uncover come to light in a way that no public relations strategy can control? The answers will shock, astound, and challenge everything you thought you knew about this modern royal saga. Imagine a family whose every move is scrutinized by millions, whose mistakes are broadcast globally, and whose secrets can ignite international scandals. That is the reality for the British royal family. From Buckingham Palace to Windsor Castle, every smile, every wave, every seemingly casual photograph is analyzed for meaning. Now, imagine this family suddenly confronted with a revelation that threatens the very narrative they have carefully curated for centuries. A revelation involving one of the most publicized and controversial members in recent history, Meghan Markle. The pressure on the royal family has always been immense. Long before Meghan and Harry stepped onto the global stage, monarchy carried weight beyond imagination. Expectations weren't just about appearances. They were about duty, tradition, and legacy. Every royal was born into a life of obligation, their identities inextricably tied to the crown, and every action had repercussions far beyond the personal. Now, add Meghan Markle into the equation, a figure both admired and criticized, whose life straddled Hollywood glamour and royal protocol. The tension was inevitable, but no one could have predicted the storm that MI6's investigation would unleash. Sources close to the palace describe an atmosphere that has grown increasingly tense in recent months. Meetings behind closed doors, hurried briefings, and discreet inquiries into hospital records have all intensified the pressure. According to insiders, the palace had been aware that there were inconsistencies, small anomalies in timelines, and questions surrounding Archie and Lilibet's records, but until now, no one had concrete evidence. Without documentation, suspicion remained just that. Suspicion. But with MI6's findings, suspicion has transformed into undeniable revelation, a moment that threatens to upend decades of careful image management. The public sees a polished facade, royals attending ceremonies, engaging with charities, and smiling for the cameras. But behind that facade lies a family under immense scrutiny, grappling with challenges that most of us cannot comprehend. One senior palace aide reportedly described the environment as high-stakes chess, where every move must be calculated, and even one misstep can ripple across continents. The revelation about Meghan's alleged non-biological status as a mother has intensified that pressure exponentially. Now, the stakes are not just public image. They are lineage, legitimacy, and historical record. The reaction within the palace is said to have ranged from disbelief to strategic planning. Even the Queen, typically composed and measured in public, is reportedly deeply concerned about how this revelation will affect the monarchy, both internally and externally. The line between private family matters and public consequence is razor thin, and in this case, any misstep could ignite a media firestorm unlike anything seen in recent history. The palace's response is being carefully orchestrated. Silence where possible, controlled information leaks where necessary, and internal discussions aimed at protecting both the family's image and the integrity of the institution. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's behavior has not gone unnoticed. Reports from palace insiders suggest heightened anxiety, erratic behavior, and an increasing urgency to control the narrative. One insider described a series of desperate moves to keep certain truths hidden, including frantic calls to advisors, private meetings with legal teams, and attempts to influence media coverage. The combination of intense public scrutiny and the personal weight of the revelations has placed Meghan in what observers describe as a state of near panic, an emotional environment that has only fueled speculation and uncertainty. Even Prince Harry, who has long been in the public eye for his own choices and controversies, finds himself navigating a treacherous landscape. His public statements and media appearances have been carefully calculated, yet the MI6 findings threaten to render many previous narratives moot. In private, sources suggest there is frustration, fear, and a sense of urgency, a need to respond, to protect, and to manage a story that has escalated far beyond what any royal could anticipate. Public perception is another layer of pressure. Social media amplifies every rumor, every leak, and every public misstep. Thousands of posts dissect images, analyze statements, and speculate about the implications of the revelations. Even before any official statement is made, public discourse shapes the narrative, influencing perception, interpretation, and emotional response. The royal family, despite centuries of experience navigating media scrutiny, is now contending with a 24-hour global conversation that refuses to be controlled. One of the most fascinating aspects of this situation is the tension between tradition and modernity. The royal family is an institution built on centuries of protocol and hierarchical control. Its legitimacy rests on lineage, legal recognition, and public trust. Yet Meghan Markle and Prince Harry have challenged norms, seeking independence, privacy, and a degree of control over their narrative. This clash between centuries-old expectations and modern desire for autonomy has created a volatile environment where the MI6 revelations act as a catalyst, intensifying pre-existing tensions within the family. Even small details, previously dismissed as inconsequential, have taken on newfound significance. Hospital records, birth certificates, and legal documents that once existed purely as administrative formalities are now at the center of an international controversy. Every signature, date, and entry is being scrutinized for discrepancies, every anomaly a potential clue in a story that seems stranger than fiction. And for those within the palace, there is the added weight of historical precedent. Any misstep in handling such a revelation could be remembered and analyzed for generations to come. The emotional toll on family members cannot be overstated. Sources describe a mixture of fear, frustration, and a sense of betrayal. Questions linger. How much did senior royals know? Who was responsible for safeguarding these records? And perhaps most importantly, how will the public react when the full story comes to light? In this environment, every conversation carries weight, every decision has consequence, and every revelation risks sparking unforeseen complications. And yet, amidst the tension, there is a sense of inevitability. Secrets, particularly those with historical and legal significance, rarely remain hidden forever. In the case of Meghan Markle and the royal children, the combination of intelligence investigation, media scrutiny, and insider leaks has created a perfect storm. The family under pressure is now facing a moment of reckoning, one that will test loyalty, discretion, and the very nature of trust within the palace walls. As we move forward, it is essential to understand that this story is not just about scandal or sensationalism. It is about the collision of public persona and private truth, about how institutions built on legacy manage crises that challenge their foundational narratives. It is about a mother whose life has been under unprecedented scrutiny, and about the children who, through no choice of their own, are at the center of a revelation with global ramifications. Why would MI6, Britain's most secretive intelligence agency, step into what appears to be a family matter? On the surface, the birth records of two children, even royal children, might seem like a purely private or bureaucratic concern. But in reality, the stakes are far higher. When lineage, succession, and the integrity of historical records intersect with secrecy and potential public scandal, the lines between private and national interest blur. And that's precisely why MI6 became involved, quietly, deliberately, and with the kind of precision that only Britain's intelligence community can command. The first whispers of MI6 involvement came from palace insiders who noticed unusual activity. Normally, records concerning births and certificates are handled discreetly by the registrar or legal teams within the royal household. There is no precedent for involving intelligence officers in verifying a birth, unless there is reason to suspect that the documents themselves might be compromised or contain inconsistencies that could have serious ramifications. And in this case, those reasons were both subtle and shocking. Sources indicate that MI6 initially acted on small anomalies noticed by administrative staff at Buckingham Palace. Dates, signatures, and entries in hospital documents didn't match up with expected patterns. Some details were minor enough to dismiss at first glance. A missing stamp here, a signature out of order there. But to trained eyes, these irregularities were red flags. MI6, known for its rigorous attention to detail, treated the anomalies seriously. What may seem trivial to the untrained eye can, in intelligence terms, indicate deeper manipulation or concealment. At the heart of the investigation was the question: could these inconsistencies indicate something far larger than simple clerical error? Were the birth records of Archie and Lilibet intentionally altered? If so, why and by whom? The possibility that these discrepancies were deliberate was alarming enough to justify a full investigation. This was no longer just about paperwork. It was about the integrity of records that affect the royal lineage, titles, and historical documentation. MI6's approach was methodical. Unlike media outlets, they do not rely on speculation, gossip, or public sentiment. Every document was scrutinized, every entry cross-referenced, and every source corroborated. Investigators reportedly obtained hospital records, private communications, and legal filings, compiling a dossier that grew increasingly complex by the day. Each discovery raised more questions than it answered, deepening the mystery and heightening the tension within the palace. One insider described MI6's work as surgical, meticulous, and relentless. Investigators were said to be working around the clock, piecing together a puzzle that spanned hospitals, registrars, and even international contacts. The secrecy surrounding their involvement was crucial. Any leak or misstep could compromise the investigation and, by extension, destabilize the royal family's carefully managed public image. It was an intelligence operation disguised as bureaucratic oversight, and the palace itself was both a subject and a spectator. The scope of MI6's involvement became clearer as sources revealed that the agency did not just review official records. They conducted interviews, analyzed third-party witness accounts, and even examined communications between palace staff and Meghan Markle's private teams. Every detail was a potential clue, every conversation a possible revelation. The sheer breadth of the investigation sent shockwaves through the royal household. Staff members who were accustomed to discretion suddenly found themselves part of a process that had implications far beyond their day-to-day duties. What MI6 uncovered was deeply unsettling. Certain records appeared to be inconsistent in ways that could not be explained by clerical error alone. In some cases, signatures were out of sequence. In others, hospital documentation lacked standard verification markers. Even minor deviations, normally considered administrative oversights, became significant under the lens of intelligence scrutiny. The palace's reaction to MI6's involvement was a mix of relief and apprehension. Relief, because the agency could ensure that the investigation remained confidential and authoritative. Apprehension, because its findings could not be contained indefinitely. The potential for explosive revelations created tension not just between palace staff and the agency, but also among senior royals themselves. Every member of the family had a stake in how the investigation would unfold, yet few could influence it. The agency operated independently, guided by evidence, protocols, and a singular focus on uncovering the truth. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's response, or lack thereof, was a source of concern among palace insiders. Sources suggest she became increasingly anxious as rumors of MI6 involvement circulated. Panic reportedly set in when she realized that no amount of public image management could control the depth or reach of an intelligence investigation. Every call she made, every attempt to influence media coverage, and every private meeting was now measured against the possibility that her actions could be scrutinized, documented, and eventually revealed. For MI6, the goal was never public scandal. It was verification, confirmation, and integrity. Yet the human dimension of the investigation made it impossible to ignore the drama it was creating behind palace doors. Those involved describe an atmosphere charged with tension, secrecy, and near-constant anxiety. Conversations that once would have been mundane were now fraught with implication. Staff members spoke in hushed tones. Meetings were brief, cautious, and tightly controlled. Even minor procedural errors could trigger alarms, because the integrity of the investigation was paramount. The investigation also extended to questions that most people would never consider asking. For example, who was present at the births? Were hospital procedures standard? Were any documents altered after the fact? Were communications between staff and Meghan's team properly recorded and verifiable? Each of these questions, seemingly procedural, carried enormous weight in determining whether the anomalies in the records were innocuous or indicative of something far more serious. Sources report that MI6 operatives became increasingly concerned with timelines. Certain records indicated discrepancies between the reported birth dates and hospital documentation. Other entries suggested interventions or arrangements that were unusual for royal births. Investigators reportedly began tracing these discrepancies to understand whether they were errors, deliberate obfuscation, or evidence of a larger pattern. Every connection, every timeline adjustment, and every document cross-reference brought new revelations and new worries for those at Buckingham Palace. The palace was acutely aware that once MI6 had completed its investigation, the findings could not be easily contained. Unlike a private inquiry, intelligence documentation carries authority. Its conclusions are taken seriously by both the government and the public, particularly when concerning the royal family. The thought of such information becoming public, even inadvertently, was enough to throw the palace into a flurry of contingency planning, strategic conversations, and urgent meetings. And then, according to sources, the breakthrough came. MI6 discovered anomalies that were impossible to ignore, anomalies that suggested a shocking conclusion. That Meghan Markle may not be the biological mother of her children. The documents, cross-referenced and verified, indicated discrepancies that could not be explained by clerical error, memory lapses, or administrative oversight. The evidence, cold and clinical on paper, was explosive in its implications, sending tremors through Buckingham Palace and leaving palace staff scrambling for guidance. At this point, the story escalates beyond mere intrigue or rumor. The intelligence findings introduced a new, undeniable reality, a revelation that would force everyone involved to reconsider everything they thought they knew about Meghan, her children, and the hidden dynamics within the royal household. The implications are staggering: legal, familial, and historical consequences that could redefine the narrative of modern monarchy. The birth of a child is typically a private, joyous occasion, a moment of celebration for parents, family, and friends. But when it comes to Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor and Lilibet Diana, their births were anything but ordinary. These events, enmeshed in the spotlight of global attention, were subjected not only to the scrutiny of cameras and headlines but, as MI6's investigation revealed, to anomalies in the very documents meant to verify their existence. The birth record scandal, as it has come to be called, is not merely about clerical errors or paperwork. It is about the integrity of history itself. The story begins in hospitals where royal births were expected to adhere to strict protocol. Every entry, from the attending physician to the precise time of birth, was recorded meticulously. For generations, the monarchy has treated such documentation with reverence because it serves as the official record of lineage, legal standing, and historical accuracy. But what MI6 discovered in the files for Archie and Lilibet was immediately alarming. Discrepancies in signatures, dates, and procedural notations that were entirely out of the ordinary for royal births. In some cases, the attending medical staff were listed inconsistently. Signatures appeared to have been added after the fact, sometimes in handwriting that differed from other verified hospital records. Certain documents that should have contained standard verification stamps or hospital seals were missing them entirely. Even the sequence of events, routine checks, emergency interventions, and follow-up confirmations showed irregularities that could not be explained by human error alone. To understand why this matters, consider the weight of a birth record. In the context of royalty, it is far more than a certificate. It is proof of identity, legitimacy, and entitlement. Any deviation from established protocol, whether intentional or accidental, can cast doubt on the very nature of a child's legal and biological status. For MI6, these anomalies were the starting point, the breadcrumb trail leading to questions far larger than administrative mistakes. Investigators began by analyzing each document line by line. The hospital logs, originally assumed to be mundane and routine, revealed contradictions when cross-referenced with legal filings and registrar entries. For example, the time of birth recorded for Lilibet in one file did not match the corresponding entry in another registry. Signatures of attending physicians appeared at odds with known schedules. Even minor variations, such as differences in pen pressure or ink, became critical pieces of evidence. MI6 treated every anomaly as a potential clue, meticulously cataloging each irregularity in what would become a highly detailed report. But the anomalies were not limited to hospital documentation. Legal filings related to the children's names, titles, and registration with the appropriate authorities showed inconsistencies that raised eyebrows. Certain forms appeared to have been submitted with unusual amendments, while others lacked signatures that would normally be required for validation. Each discrepancy compounded the previous one, creating a pattern that suggested deliberate obfuscation. Sources close to the investigation described the discovery of these anomalies as jaw-dropping. Staff members within the palace, accustomed to discretion and secrecy, were reportedly shocked at the level of inconsistency in records that had previously been considered foolproof. The revelation created tension among administrative staff, legal teams, and senior royals alike. Suddenly, a story that had been quietly managed behind palace walls was now teetering on the edge of explosive public exposure. The scandal deepened when MI6 began cross-referencing the birth records with private communications. Emails, internal memos, and even personal messages revealed a pattern of urgency and secrecy that corresponded with the anomalies in the documents. Instructions were reportedly given to ensure that certain entries were consistent with public statements, even if the underlying documentation suggested otherwise. In other words, The evidence suggested that efforts had been made to align public perception with a narrative that might not have fully reflected reality. Consider the implications. If birth records were altered, amended, or selectively managed, it raises questions not only about administrative competence but about intent. Why would anyone manipulate or alter official documentation? What motive could be powerful enough to risk exposure, legal ramifications, and potential public scandal? MI6's investigators began to consider scenarios that went far beyond typical royal intrigue, exploring the possibility that someone had sought to conceal biological truths from both the public and the palace itself. The documents themselves tell a story that is chilling in its subtlety. Minor adjustments, almost imperceptible at first glance, accumulate into a pattern of anomalies that is impossible to ignore. Cross-referencing with independent registries and forensic handwriting analysis revealed that certain signatures may have been retroactively applied. Dates and times, which should have been consistent across multiple records, displayed inconsistencies that suggested intentional revision. Even procedural notes, entries detailing routine newborn care, contained irregularities that hinted at manipulation or omission. From a legal standpoint, these findings are monumental. Birth records form the basis of identity verification, eligibility for titles, and inheritance rights. If those records are compromised, even partially, the consequences are profound. In a royal context, where lineage dictates not just public perception but constitutional legitimacy, the stakes are exponentially higher. Every discrepancy in these records, therefore, carries weight far beyond the immediate anomaly. It challenges assumptions, threatens credibility, and raises questions about the integrity of the institution itself. Yet the human drama behind these anomalies is perhaps even more compelling. According to sources, the awareness of potential exposure has led to heightened anxiety within the royal household. Staff members who once performed routine duties without concern now find themselves entangled in a web of secrecy, speculation, and strategic calculation. Conversations are measured, movements are discreet, and the atmosphere is described as tense, almost charged with anticipation. Every interaction becomes a potential leak, and every decision carries consequence. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's role in this emerging scandal is impossible to overlook. While the investigation does not yet assign blame, sources indicate that her involvement, whether intentional or circumstantial, has been a focal point. Staff accounts suggest that she may have been aware of certain inconsistencies and that private discussions regarding the presentation of the records were frequent and urgent. The combination of MI6 scrutiny and public curiosity places her at the center of a narrative she cannot control, and every action she takes is analyzed not only for its content, but for its implication in a wider story of secrecy and revelation. Public reaction, though not yet fully informed, is already beginning to take shape. Rumors, leaks, and speculation circulate with the speed of social media amplification. Analysts, journalists, and commentators dissect every snippet of information, attempting to piece together a coherent narrative from fragments of evidence. Yet, even as curiosity grows, the full implications remain hidden, tantalizing the public with the promise of a revelation that is both shocking and consequential. And while much of the world watches and speculates, MI6 continues its methodical work. Every anomaly is a thread, every irregularity a lead, and every piece of correspondence a potential revelation. Investigators are said to be operating with the utmost caution, ensuring that findings are verified, corroborated, and indisputable before any conclusions are drawn. The process is deliberate, exhaustive, and relentless. A necessary approach when the stakes are nothing less than the integrity of the royal family's most fundamental records. Imagine a world where the truth cannot be argued, negotiated, or spun, where evidence exists not in words or appearances, but in the very building blocks of life itself, DNA. For centuries, the royal family has relied on tradition, ceremony, and public perception to maintain its authority. But now, science has entered the story, and its revelations are as precise as they are shocking. MI6's investigation, which began with anomalies in birth records, has led to a startling intersection of intelligence, biology, and secrecy. The question on everyone's mind: could the children's genetic lineage tell a story that no official narrative has ever revealed? DNA is, in many ways, the ultimate truth detector. While paper records can be altered, signatures forged, and dates manipulated, DNA remains constant. It is an immutable measure of biological connection. The moment MI6 suspected that anomalies in the birth records might indicate more than clerical errors, the natural next step was to examine the genetic evidence. Sources report that private, confidential DNA testing was conducted under the strictest secrecy, overseen by both intelligence experts and forensic scientists. The goal was simple yet profound: confirm, with irrefutable certainty, the biological relationships at the heart of this royal mystery. The process itself was meticulous. Samples were reportedly obtained discreetly from medical facilities, legal repositories, and private sources. Each sample underwent rigorous testing, paternity analysis, maternal confirmation, and cross-referencing with historical genetic data from verified royal lineage. The forensic process is precise, leaving little room for error. Even minor contamination, procedural missteps, or misinterpretation can invalidate results. For MI6 and its scientific collaborators, precision was paramount because the implications of these findings extended far beyond the laboratory. What makes this investigation unprecedented is not merely the technology employed, but the context in which it was applied. DNA testing for legal or administrative purposes is one thing. Conducting genetic verification in a high-profile royal context is another entirely. The stakes are astronomical. Public perception, historical record, and royal legitimacy all depend on the outcome. Any confirmation or contradiction could trigger legal, familial, and constitutional consequences. And according to insiders, the results of these tests were nothing short of extraordinary. Initial findings reportedly raised eyebrows, even among seasoned MI6 operatives. Patterns in the genetic data suggested discrepancies that were difficult to reconcile with the accepted public narrative. While the details are confidential, sources indicate that the results pointed to the possibility that Meghan Markle may not be the biological mother of Archie or Lilibet. The genetic evidence, cross-verified and analyzed using multiple independent methods, appeared to corroborate the anomalies observed in the birth records. To put this into perspective, consider the emotional and societal ramifications. A mother's relationship with her child is typically measured in love, care, and shared history. But when biological truths come into question, even the most intimate familial bonds are reframed in terms of legality, lineage, and recognition. For Meghan, this revelation represents a convergence of public scrutiny, personal identity, and maternal responsibility. A perfect storm of pressure and expectation that few could navigate successfully. The palace, of course, is acutely aware of these implications. Sources suggest that senior royals were briefed on preliminary findings with the utmost caution. The goal was not to create panic, but to prepare for the potential fallout. Even within the walls of Buckingham Palace, where secrecy is a way of life, the introduction of genetic evidence into the conversation amplified tension exponentially. Conversations that might previously have been routine became high-stakes deliberations, where every word carried consequence and every interpretation could influence decisions at the highest level. Meanwhile, Meghan Markle's response to the ongoing investigation reportedly intensified her sense of urgency. Insiders describe a pattern of private meetings, legal consultations, and attempts to influence both media coverage and palace communications. The intersection of intelligence scrutiny and genetic evidence left little room for public relations maneuvering. Every action, every decision, every attempt to shape the narrative was measured against the backdrop of incontrovertible science, a factor that could not be spun or reinterpreted. For the public, the story is mesmerizing because it operates at multiple levels simultaneously. There is the human drama, a mother facing questions about her biological connection to her children. There is the institutional drama, a royal family grappling with revelations that could impact succession, public perception, and historical record. And there is the intelligence drama, MI6 conducting a quiet yet comprehensive investigation into one of the most private aspects of royal life. using the unassailable power of genetic science to uncover truths that no amount of secrecy could obscure. Yet the DNA revelations are only part of the story. What makes them so explosive is how they intersect with other evidence uncovered during the investigation. The anomalies in birth records, the procedural irregularities at hospitals, and the confidential communications that suggest a coordinated effort to manage perception. Together, these pieces form a mosaic of revelation, each fragment reinforcing the other, culminating in a narrative that is as compelling as it is shocking. Ethically and emotionally, the situation is unprecedented. For decades, the public has consumed stories about royal life with a mixture of fascination, reverence, and, at times, judgment. The introduction of DNA evidence adds a new layer of complexity. The truth is no longer subject to interpretation or opinion. It exists in black and white, encoded in the very essence of life itself. For Meghan Markle, this is not merely a challenge of public perception. It is a confrontation with undeniable biological reality. The implications extend beyond the palace walls. Succession rights, legal recognition, and public trust are all at stake. The monarchy relies on continuity, legitimacy, and the perception of unbroken lineage. A revelation that challenges the accepted biological narrative could reshape public perception, influence legal considerations, and even alter the historical record. It is a scenario that no royal household has faced in modern times, and one that demands careful navigation, strategic planning, and, above all, discretion. And yet, for all the scientific precision and intelligence oversight, the human element remains central. Love, care, and familial bonds exist alongside legality and biology. Meghan Markle, despite the scrutiny and the pressure, is still a mother in the emotional sense. A parent in the day-to-day reality of nurturing, protecting, and guiding her children. The collision of personal. As MI6 continued its work, the agency reportedly coordinated findings with forensic experts, legal advisors, and palace officials to ensure accuracy and confidentiality. Every detail was cross-checked, every anomaly confirmed, and every result interpreted within the context of both legal and royal frameworks. The depth of this investigation, its meticulous attention to detail, and its explosive implications make it one of the most consequential intelligence operations in recent memory. An operation with the potential to reshape narratives, challenge perceptions, and redefine relationships. But just as the revelations seemed complete, sources indicate that there was one final, shocking piece of evidence that would leave the palace reeling. A detail so consequential, so undeniable, that it would force everyone involved, royals, staff, and intelligence operatives alike, to reconsider everything they thought they knew. Panic is a curious thing. It starts small. An uneasy feeling, a tightening in the chest, a sense that something is off. But when the pressure escalates, when secrets unravel, and when the weight of public and private scrutiny converges, panic can become all-consuming. For Meghan Markle, sources suggest that this moment has arrived. The revelation of anomalies in birth records, combined with DNA evidence that challenges long-held assumptions, has reportedly pushed her into what insiders describe as full-blown panic mode. The first signs were subtle, almost imperceptible. Staff at Frogmore Cottage and Kensington Palace noticed sudden changes in her schedule. Meetings that had previously been routine became urgent, cryptic, and heavily guarded. Messages were sent at odd hours. Legal teams were consulted with unusual frequency, and private communications appeared increasingly desperate. For someone accustomed to controlling narratives through media appearances, public statements, and carefully staged photographs, the realization that certain truths could no longer be managed must have been jarring. Sources indicate that Meghan began to implement a series of rapid response measures to mitigate the potential fallout. Legal advisors were instructed to prepare statements. Media contacts were quietly briefed, and private communications were sent to key allies in an attempt to control both perception and narrative. Panic, in this context, was not just emotional. It was operational, affecting strategy, decision-making, and every interaction she had with staff, family, and advisors. Insiders described moments of intense anxiety behind closed doors. One aide reportedly said that Meghan, moved like someone constantly on edge, anticipating leaks, anticipating confrontation, anticipating exposure. The sense of urgency, the need to respond before others could act, created an environment charged with tension. Even small procedural missteps, like a delayed email response or an unclear instruction, could trigger stress and magnify panic. The palace, already under pressure from MI6's investigation, became a landscape of heightened emotions and strategic maneuvering. The psychological dimension cannot be overstated. Panic affects cognition, judgment, and decision-making. Sources claim that Meghan's behavior in this period included rapid shifts in tone, frequent consultations with advisors, and a heightened sensitivity to perceived threats. Staff observed what they described as erratic scheduling, with meetings planned at odd hours and instructions changing from one moment to the next. The intensity of the situation, combined with the stakes involved, created a feedback loop. The more she panicked, the more cautious and strategic she had to be, which in turn amplified the panic. This panic was compounded by awareness of the stakes beyond personal reputation. The anomalies in birth records and the DNA revelations did not exist in isolation. They intersected with public perception, legal implications, and royal protocol. Every decision, every public appearance, every interaction had to be calculated not only for immediate impact, but for long-term consequences. The intelligence findings, combined with forensic evidence, left little room for error. In this context, panic is not irrational. It is a survival mechanism responding to unprecedented pressure. Staff and insiders also noted strategic attempts to control the narrative. Legal teams were reportedly drafting contingency statements. Social media messaging was being reviewed, and communications with media outlets were carefully coordinated. Each action was designed to anticipate potential leaks, counter negative narratives, and protect both personal and institutional interests. Yet, despite meticulous planning, the sheer magnitude of the investigation and the irrefutable nature of the evidence made complete control impossible. The panic also manifested in her interactions with Prince Harry. Sources suggest that private conversations between the couple became increasingly tense, with Harry reportedly trying to balance support for Meghan with awareness of the broader implications of the findings. The combination of public scrutiny, private pressure, and the high stakes of royal protocol created an environment where stress and anxiety were almost inevitable. Every step was measured, yet every step carried risk. At the same time, the media ecosystem amplified the stress. Rumors and speculation, even in their earliest stages, travel faster than any carefully crafted narrative. Social media discussions dissected public appearances, photo ops, and statements, creating an environment in which perception could not be fully managed. For someone in Meghan's position, panic is not merely an internal experience. It is a response to external pressures that are constant, pervasive, and unpredictable. Insiders also report that her attempts at mitigation occasionally bordered on desperation. Efforts to secure private interviews, influence reporting, and preempt leaks were reportedly intense and frequent. Legal counsel, media advisors, and palace staff were all involved in a multi-layered strategy aimed at protecting both personal reputation and the narrative surrounding the children. Yet, the very nature of MI6's involvement, confidential, precise, and comprehensive, meant that many of these efforts had little effect on the underlying truth being uncovered. The human element of panic is intertwined with the perception of control. Meghan, accustomed to influencing narrative and image, faced a scenario in which control was slipping. The anomalies, the DNA evidence, the scrutiny of intelligence operatives, all of these were beyond manipulation. The result, according to sources, was heightened anxiety, rapid decision-making, and strategic moves aimed at slowing or containing the inevitable exposure. Panic became both a reaction and a tool, shaping behavior in ways that were both conscious and subconscious. But the consequences of this panic were not limited to Meghan alone. Her state of urgency reportedly influenced palace staff, legal teams, and advisors, creating a ripple effect. The pressure cascaded through the institution, amplifying tension and heightening the stakes for every decision. In essence, the panic became contagious, shaping the dynamics of communication, planning, and execution within the royal household. Despite the intensity of these developments, Meghan remained focused on one overriding goal: protecting her children and herself from the potential fallout. The stakes were not abstract, they were deeply personal. Every decision, every interaction, every strategic move was filtered through the lens of preserving both public image and familial relationships. Panic, in this context, was inseparable from survival, influencing thought, emotion, and action in ways that few outside the palace could fully comprehend. And yet, even in the midst of this panic, the investigation continued relentlessly. MI6, with its precise methods and unwavering focus on evidence, pressed forward. Every anomaly was documented, every discrepancy verified, and every lead pursued to its logical conclusion. The tension between Meghan's urgent efforts to contain the situation and the inexorable progress of intelligence investigation created a dramatic narrative, one where every moment was charged with anticipation and every decision carried monumental weight. The palace has always been a place of carefully maintained order, a stage where tradition, protocol, and discretion govern every interaction. Behind the walls of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, aides, advisors, and royals themselves operate within a meticulously choreographed system designed to protect reputation, manage information, and maintain continuity. But when MI6's revelations about Meghan Markle and the birth records of Archie and Lilibet began to surface internally, that system was shaken to its core. The palace, sources say, descended into a state of controlled chaos. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. Senior aides noticed an unusual flurry of activity among the administrative staff: rapid-fire meetings, encrypted communications, and urgent consultations with legal teams. For staff accustomed to the palace's precise routines, the change was jarring. Protocols that had previously been rigid and predictable became fluid, as if everyone was reacting to an invisible pressure. The atmosphere, insiders report, was charged with tension. The kind of tension that makes even seasoned palace staff second-guess every decision. At the heart of the chaos was uncertainty. The anomalies in birth records and the potential implications of the DNA revelations created questions that had no easy answers. Legal teams debated the ramifications for succession and titles, administrative staff scrambled to verify documentation, and senior royals convened private briefings to assess strategy. Each conversation seemed to generate more questions than answers, intensifying the sense of urgency and stress throughout the household. Sources describe meetings where aides and advisors spoke in hushed tones, often pausing mid-sentence out of fear that their words might be overheard or misconstrued. Every document was scrutinized twice, sometimes 3 times, as if the very act of verification could prevent disaster. Instructions from senior royals were reportedly vague and open to interpretation, leading to confusion and anxiety among staff tasked with implementing them. The chain of command, usually a clear hierarchy, became a web of conflicting priorities and shifting responsibilities. Even within the highest echelons of the family, reactions varied. Reports suggest that King Charles, historically measured and composed, was deeply concerned about the potential impact on both public perception and the legal standing of the children. Private conversations with advisors reportedly focused on damage control, legal strategy, and the potential fallout if the information were to leak to the media. Meanwhile, other senior family members were described as frustrated, alarmed, and, in some cases, incredulous at the nature of the revelations. The chaos was not limited to discussions about protocol or legal ramifications. Emotion ran high, sources say, as individuals struggled to reconcile loyalty, family dynamics, and public duty. The palace, often portrayed as a monolith of discipline and composure, became a place where anxiety, fear, and uncertainty shaped every interaction. Staff members reported whispered concerns, nervous glances, and a heightened awareness that even the smallest misstep could have enormous consequences. One particularly tense moment reportedly occurred when a senior aide discovered discrepancies in internal communications related to the children's documentation. The aide, accustomed to smooth operations, was said to be stunned by the inconsistencies and immediately escalated the matter to the legal team. This, in turn, triggered a series of urgent meetings among senior staff, lawyers, and advisors, who were forced to reassess everything from prior submissions to internal protocols. The sense of internal chaos, while controlled on the surface, was palpable. Public perception also weighed heavily on the palace's internal deliberations. While the revelations were largely confined to internal knowledge at this stage, the awareness that information could leak at any moment intensified the pressure. Staff were reportedly instructed to maintain absolute discretion, limit communication to verified channels, and avoid any actions that could inadvertently fuel speculation. The combination of secrecy, high stakes, and potential public scrutiny created a pressure cooker environment where stress was inevitable and errors were feared. For Meghan Markle, the palace's reactions contributed to her escalating panic. Sources indicate that every staff briefing, every hushed conversation, and every internal strategy session reinforced the urgency of the situation. The realization that senior royals were aware of anomalies in the birth records and that intelligence findings could not be easily suppressed amplified her sense of urgency. Panic, already present, became a driving force behind her actions and decisions, further intensifying the drama unfolding within the household. The juxtaposition of institutional control and internal chaos created a surreal environment. On one hand, the palace operates under centuries of tradition, hierarchy, and protocol, designed to manage even the most complex crises. On the other hand, the unprecedented nature of the revelations, combining intelligence investigations, anomalies in birth documentation, and potential DNA discrepancies, challenged the very systems designed to maintain order. Staff and royals alike found themselves navigating uncharted territory, balancing loyalty, secrecy, and strategic planning with the emotional weight of the situation. Even routine tasks became fraught with complexity. Delivering messages, filing documents, and coordinating schedules required extraordinary care, as any miscommunication could inadvertently reveal sensitive information. Staff members were reportedly hyper-aware that every action was being scrutinized, internally and externally, and that the implications of errors extended far beyond immediate consequences. The palace, sources say, became a stage for high-stakes maneuvering, where precision, discretion, and foresight were paramount. The emotional toll on senior royals was also significant. Even as they sought to manage the situation strategically, the reality of potential public fallout, legal challenges, and familial tension weighed heavily. Meetings were reportedly tense, sometimes heated, as differing opinions on how to handle the revelations clashed. The combination of secrecy, high stakes, and emotional investment created an environment in which every decision felt critical and every potential mistake could have long-term ramifications. At the center of this whirlwind stood the children, Archie and Lilibet, whose very existence had become a focal point of investigation, speculation, and concern. While the palace sought to manage information, protect reputations, and preserve legacy, the human dimension, the emotional well-being of those involved, added layers of complexity. Every decision about disclosure, privacy, and communication had to account not only for legal and public considerations, but for the impact on the lives of two young children. Yet, despite the chaos, the palace maintained a degree of control. Systems remained in place to monitor information flow, coordinate legal responses, and manage internal communications. While the environment was fraught with tension, senior advisors and legal teams worked tirelessly to ensure that operational integrity was preserved. Every action was deliberate, every step calculated, and every contingency considered. The palace, though rocked by internal upheaval, remained a fortress of strategy, secrecy, and measured response. The British media has always been a relentless force, particularly when it comes to the royal family. Paparazzi, tabloids, and digital news outlets compete for scoops, exclusives, and sensational headlines, often blurring the line between fact and conjecture. But when MI6's investigation into Meghan Markle and the anomalies surrounding Archie and Lilibet's birth records began to leak, albeit subtly, the media ecosystem ignited like dry tinder meeting a spark. The first reports were cautious, carefully worded, and speculative. Sources familiar with palace dynamics began providing hints to journalists, anomalies in documentation, unusual hospital procedures, and the involvement of intelligence operatives. Headlines appeared in small sections of online tabloids and social media commentary, raising curiosity without fully revealing the depth of the scandal. But the intrigue was irresistible, and once the initial sparks hit the public consciousness, the fire spread rapidly. Social media amplified the impact almost instantaneously. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok became echo chambers for speculation, where snippets of leaked information were dissected, analyzed, and circulated globally. Every photograph of Meghan, every public statement by Prince Harry, and every minor update in the royal household became fodder for debate. The speed at which information traveled, often before verification, created a chaotic narrative ecosystem where truth and rumor intertwined. Mainstream media soon caught up. Newspapers and television outlets, sensing the story's explosive potential, began dedicating coverage to every subtlety. Analysts dissected hospital records, public appearances, and historical royal protocols. Commentators debated the implications of MI6's involvement, the anomalies in birth documentation, and the potential consequences for the monarchy. Even without full confirmation, the narrative of a scandal involving Meghan, her children, and questions of legitimacy became a global obsession. Palace communications teams, trained to manage crises and control narrative flow, struggled to keep pace. Leaks, whether deliberate or inadvertent, made it impossible to fully contain the story. Statements had to be carefully drafted, legal counsel consulted, and public perception constantly monitored. Every response carried immense risk. A misstep could exacerbate speculation, deepen public distrust, and amplify the media frenzy. The media storm, it seemed, could not be contained. The timing of the leaks added to the chaos. Just as the investigation's findings were internally consolidated, subtle hints began reaching journalists, often in cryptic or partial form. A line here, a reference there, and suddenly the narrative began to take shape in public imagination. The intrigue was magnified by the secrecy surrounding MI6's involvement. For a story of such magnitude, the combination of intelligence investigation and media speculation created the perfect storm. The palace was under pressure from both inside and outside. The role of social media influencers and independent commentators further complicated matters. In a digital age where news is no longer media